Hey there, Purrfect Peeps. Have you ever wanted to come on to a podcast and talk about what you've been working on, or do you have a product to show off? We would love to have you on Purrfect.dev. Please reach out. You can find us on codingcat.dev or just reach out to me personally, Alex at codingcat.dev. I'm really looking forward to some new stories, whether it's in Flutter, in Vue, in Angular, or if you just have a new product that you've created, I'd love to hear about it. Anything in the web development space is wonderful, but if you have a mobile app, a Flutter app, come say hello. Don't be afraid. We'd love to have you on. Thanks so much. Welcome back, Purrfect Peeps, to Purrfect.dev. Today we are talking all about SAFe, and it is in the terms of Scrum, ? Is Scrum on steroids? That's safe? I don't know. We're going to break it all down. We have some special guests straight from OST, Elizabeth Wilson and Brett Fitzgerald. Do you guys want to introduce yourself? Go ahead, Elizabeth. You can go first.
All right. Yes, I'm Elizabeth Wilson. I have been a lead Agile coach at OST for the last several years. I've worked with a variety of large to small organizations where we've seen the benefits of applying SAFe and a majority of the practices. So we're looking forward to discussing that with you today.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
Brett?
Yeah, I'm Brett Fitzgerald. I'm an Agile coach and a team lead at OST. I came up kind of through the software development background and then into the Scrum world and then up into the scaled Agile framework. So that's what got me here today.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to throw this slide up for those who are watching on the YouTubes or the Twitches of the world. This is what we're talking about today, this crazy maze of SAFe. And yeah, this is a lot to take in. I don't expect anyone to actually look at it. But we're going to break down each part of SAFe and kind of what it is. And I think if I've completely lost our viewers at this point, we need to start off with what is Agile? Brett, can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so Agile in general, there's a lot of, like, you ask 10 different people what Agile is and they'll give you 10 different answers. But at its core, Agile is the process of taking the work that we're doing and focusing on value delivery and making sure that all of our processes and systems are optimized for that value delivery. And then at routine checkpoints, we kind of look back and we say, what's been working well? What can we improve on? So we have that continuous improvement element in there as well. So it's less about like forecasting and making sure we have budgets set up front and long-term planning. And it's saying incrementally, let's deliver something as quick as we can, see how it's working, and then come back and see, do we need to adjust the direction that we're headed? And then continue development from there. It's kind of based on the premise that the ideal product emerges. It's not designed up front.
Yeah, and you guys always call me out when I say we're doing project management, and what we're actually doing is product management. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to break away from that project mentality of defining scope rigidly up front and then gathering a group of people around that scope and then doing that work, delivering that work at the end, and then disbanding that team. We want to focus on kind of having a product that we're supporting and long-lived teams.
So then projects tend to have like a hard end date where a product has this length of life that you want to continue to fuel until you no longer see the value in fueling it.
And then to take that a step further, and people might have heard this term more often, is Scrum. Can you break down like what Scrum is and what that really means to a product?
Yeah, sure.
Very similar to Agile, really, right? It has like the 3 pillars around transparency, inspection, adaptation, and it's really about having that iterative cycle, bringing things down into the 2-week sprints or maybe 3-week sprints, depending on how that team functions. But continuing to reflect and improve upon your process, but always delivering a bit of value at the end of that segment.
Cool. So why, or maybe I should ask it differently. Do typically people get into Scrum or Agile because they're trying to move faster, or is it because like everyone's doing it? Why don't we do it? Why do people actually start using Scrum?
Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons. So one of the main reasons you kind of hit on is we want to deliver product quicker. And so enabling a team to say, we're not just focused on delivery of the value itself, but we can also open up the scope of their responsibility to say, the way that we deliver value is also in our purview. So that's how we get into the whole DevOps culture and saying it's not just about writing code and then delivering that code, but we can say, all right, what do we need to do to make that delivery process faster? And so we can start working on our pipeline. So that speed of delivery is important, but also it just generally leads to more engaged employees if you're looking at it from like a management standpoint, because it gives autonomy to the team. And so the team gets to make the decisions around the work because they're closest to the work. So they're the most knowledgeable. And so when you give a team a problem instead of like scope and definition and requirements, you give them a problem to solve. It's usually more engaging for a team to say, all right, this is how we want to solve the problem. And then they move forward with that. So usually it's more engaging from a work standpoint as well.
And then the typical items that I've seen kind of in that Scrum, like we talk 2-week cycle or 3-week cycle. There's a lot of parts and pieces to Scrum itself, but a question that comes up often is the daily stand-up. Like, is that a thing that's really required? Is that meant to bring the team together? Is it a status update? Can you explain like what that daily stand-up really entails and is used for?
Yeah, so the daily stand-up, like you said, it's pretty contentious because it seems like having a meeting every day can get a little tedious. And so, excuse me. So the Scrum Guide originally described the daily stand-up as answering 3 questions. Everybody goes in a circle and they say, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And do you have any blockers that we need to escalate? But the new edition of the Scrum Guide that came out at the end of 2020, they kind of went back on that a little bit and they kind of recognized some of the trends that are happening in the marketplace and saying those questions can get a little stale and routine. And so now the goal of that stand-up is to rally around the work that we're doing. We're doing 2 or 3 week sprints and we have a goal for that time period. And so now our daily stand-up is really our team coming together saying, all right, how are we doing like accomplishing that goal? And what can we be doing today to get us closer to that accomplishment? So it's really almost like a mini planning session. And it only lasts 15 minutes. And then a lot of teams see this as like the kickoff to the day. So you can come in and check your email, do all your stuff, read your blogs and stuff like that. And then like we figure out what are we going to do today? And then we go after it until it's at home.
Yeah, and I guess, Wilson, when we start to talk about that a little bit, and we talk about like sprint planning, how does sprint planning, because it sounds like when Brett's describing like, oh, you just figure it out that day and start doing it. It
sounds like a pep rally.
More to it, right? Like, what is the sprint planning piece to that versus, when we were saying the old waterfall type of world, we just thought we could figure everything out at one time. What's that look like? What's sprint planning?
Well, just to kind of comment on Brittany, she did say like a pep rally for the daily stand-up, and that's exactly it. There's a lot of necessary pressure, good pressure on the Scrum Master to make those meetings effective so people don't dry out from attending them. Like there's a purpose behind them, but the Scrum Master really has to have that rallying card. Sprint planning is crucial because, again, it allows you to take the items from your backlog that you've previously groomed and actually plan them out for 2 weeks with a goal that you're actually going to deliver something into production at the end of this. Ideally, that's not always how every team has it set up, but ideally you should be able to deliver some value. And what that does is it builds confidence. The more often that you can actually showcase the value that your team can deliver, the more confidence you're going to build within the organization and even within that team.
Very cool. And then as we kind of make it through that and you bring in QA, and now I need to pause a second and say, Brittany, am I boring you with our daily stand-ups? Oh no.
Not at all.
No comment. Yeah. Okay.
No, I think they're actually beneficial, and I was going to say that I think that it adds like to the user flow too. Like you get a little bit of insight into the flow of your product and how each piece like works and connects together, and I think it helps a lot.
Yeah, and then when we start to like get through testing and that sort of kind of cyclical items that we do through the sprint planning cycle. Can you, Brett, talk about like acceptance criteria and what that actually means coming through that?
Yeah, so from the sense of Scrum, we talk about user stories first. So if you want to talk about acceptance criteria, we kind of talk about the user stories first and saying, we're defining our work as the way that our users engage with our system. So from a development standpoint, I'm not just trying to build a technical feature. I'm trying to build an experience that my users are going to go through when they use our product. And so when I get myself into that mindset, it gives me that freedom to kind of then focus on the implementation the way that I think makes sense to me and the rest of the team. So the user stories are just very simple sentences that would say, as a customer who's checking out, I want to apply a discount code to my cart so that I can get relevant discounts or something like that. So that's the format. It's, as a user, I want to whatever, so that whatever. So when I have that mindset, there's still some kind of questionable areas where maybe as a developer I have some questions and we want to ask the business, okay, so where do these product codes come from? Like, how are we checking these against existing codes? Can I add multiple products? So there's some questions that have business implications. And so those acceptance criteria kind of help further define that story. So we might ask our product owner, so the person who's kind of representing the users and the business, can I add multiple checkout like coupon codes to my cart? And they might come back and say, yeah, we can have stackable coupon codes. And so that goes into my implementation of that. And so the acceptance criteria further defines the work that's being done. And then that gives the product owner the ability to go through and say, as long as these acceptance criteria have been met and the needs of the customer have been met, then this story can be accepted as being completed. And we can say that value has been delivered.
And what happens when the development side of that story says, we hit everything you asked for, that acceptance criteria was met, and your customer or your product owner is saying, no, it's not? Like, how do you work through that conflict resolution?
Yeah, it's definitely time for like a crucial conversation in that moment and saying, like, we did the things that we were asked for, so why isn't this accepted? And so what we usually like to see is if we got all the work in that story done and completed and delivered, let's call that story done. Now this is the pivot part of being agile and saying we delivered the value and maybe it's not what we were expecting at the end, or maybe it's not having the impact. So let's make another story to follow up and pivot and say, okay, so hypothetically, we did deliver all these stackable coupon codes, and now it turns out that people are actually buying products and we owe them money because somehow they're adding 50 different coupons to this. Okay, let's pivot away from that. And
Goal
so
two stacked, right?
Yeah, exactly. How do we handle that? So we met the criteria, but the product owner is saying, like, no, that's not actually what we want. So let's create another story. It goes into the backlog. It gets prioritized, probably pretty high if we're bleeding money from our shopping cart. And then we work on that. And so we're still moving forward. We didn't throw away our old work. We went in a direction. We had to alter that a little bit, and then we keep going from there.
Very cool. And with that story specifically, would there be any point in time where you actually said, okay, our work's complete, that story is complete, the feature's in production, and we're losing money? Is there another story that has to occur to say back all that out, or what does that look like if there's some sort of like major bug or something that comes in?
Yeah, so you're getting more into like sort of the DevOps implementations of the Agile space, and so there's a bunch of different ways like that you want to think about that. And we want to, when we're talking about DevOps, we want to be able to either fix forward very quickly or be able to roll back very quickly. So ideally we fix forward and we say, in a couple of hours max, can we get a fix out there? If not, then we'll have other options, hopefully built into our pipeline. Like we could have a feature flag that we can just toggle off real quick and just disable the coupon codes for now. And so we want to be proactive in how we build those things so that we can toggle things on and off just for that exact reason. Or you might be in some markets where there are no coupon codes, and it's just annoying to your customer to be like, oh, there's a field for coupon codes. So some markets might have that shut off. So
cool. No, this is great. So that was a great overview of Agile and Scrum. And I think Brittany and I kind of loosely work off of that for Coding Cat. At OST, we definitely utilize this. But Wilson, can you talk about that all covered Scrum very well, but now we're talking like safe is Scrum on steroids, right? Like the title that you kind of came up with in our pre-meeting. What does that mean? Like, what is safe, and why do we start using it?
So when do you flip the switch, right?
Yeah.
Why do you have to start considering safe? So when you have multiple Agile teams that are working together, some of those are going to be working towards the same value. Others are going to be working on different value streams. And as this grows, you're going to start to lose visibility across these teams and have a lack of ability to plan for their backlogs. And you need to be able to do that at the program level, maybe even at the enterprise level. So And even if I take a step back, you can apply principles of SAFe even if you only have a couple teams. We do that today as we're starting to introduce some of our clients into this methodology or this framework, trying to see if it's going to be a good fit for the growth that we see that they have potential for. And that's key because it gives you the right guardrails in place. It gives leadership comfort, especially if they're moving out of waterfall, and it gives them proper planning meetings built out in a cadence so that they know that it's just not a flash in the pan, that there's a set plan and repeatability to this that's going to gain them more visibility to the work that they're working towards. So more specifically, these teams that are tied to the same value stream, same value delivered, they're going to have these planning sessions over 2 days called product increment planning sessions. And these are actually going to allow you to plan work over 10 to 12 weeks. And you're going to be able to identify risks and dependencies across these teams. That's visibility that typically is found too late, like maybe days, maybe short weeks before they stumble upon them. But in this session, it allows them to actually have several weeks visibility into that so they can pivot. Do we need to throw that feature out? Do we need to modify how we would address it? Those conversations, even though are still painful, they're better to have earlier than later. Mm-hmm. And that's feedback that we received from a marketing team at a company that was building connected products. There was always this friction between marketing and development and their inability to be able to effectively plan their marketing efforts because they couldn't rely on the development delivery dates. Having these sessions in place gave them the visibility to pivot early enough if necessary so they could properly plan on the marketing end. And they said, yeah, I still don't like having these conversations about impacts, but I sure do like them way more in advance so I can make proper decisions in my day-to-day.
So just giving them that like visibility into the actual pipeline or the process of work, it was enough so that they felt more comfortable or could like pull things off of their marketing schedule, and it allows the entire business to almost essentially get on the same page. Is that kind of the idea behind it?
Exactly. Yeah, we definitely have seen a lot of positive benefits to the relationships from the business to IT side going through this process.
So the other part of PI planning, so we kind of talked about, we're building up it a little bit here. So we talked about sprint planning, and now we talked about PI planning. That PI planning, I've seen most of the time happens once per quarter. What is the usual like strategy behind that, or how often are you doing PI planning?
Once a quarter is about right. There's some organizations that do it once every 10 weeks. So a little bit more frequently, they usually get 5 planning sessions in a year doing it that way. But others have found a good rhythm tying it to their quarter because that's also when there's budget renewals or resource refreshing that can take place in regards to their contractors that they work with. So quarterly tends to be a good way for them to plan out their year.
Cool. So the other piece to SAFe is I've heard, and it's kind of because of this PI planning, is does SAFe slow a project down? And the reason I've heard that is PI planning just took 2 days out of all those quarters. So at least 8 days are kind of gone, right? You just slowed my entire year down, right? So how do you kind of, conflict? It's a conflicting view.
Right.
How do you get through that and say, no, you just saved a lot of time because we're in this session together knowing things? What does that look like?
If you could take a look at everyone's calendar pre-PI, before they adopted SAFe, and added up all the hours of meetings that they were in, especially last minute meetings that were pulled together because things were creeping up that they weren't expecting, it definitely surpasses the amount of time that we collaborated for 2 straight days, the amount of work that we've gone through. And especially because you're doing such a large chunk of it and you're pulling so many people together, that now the business and IT are on the same page on the same day. There's no catch up. There's no gap in communication. Everybody is up to speed and can react more intelligently as different things that start to impact the work that's ahead of them.
Yeah, and every time I like the visual I start to use is kids using the cup and the string talking to each other, and something gets lost in there.
Yeah.
And if you can just eliminate all that and get together one time, like it's so much better.
So much better.
So let's see here. So we talked a little bit about what SAFe was. We talked about some of the benefits, but when does a company kind of decide to make that switch? So like Brittany and I it's a 2-person team at Coding Cat. Should we adopt SAFe tomorrow? What does that look like?
That's a good question. When do you throw that switch? And there's a lot of different factors that can go into that. So if you're 2 people, I would say you're probably not ready to go full safe yet. You probably have pretty good alignment between your business and your execution there. So 2 people, I wouldn't say that you're ready for safe. Like if you have a single development team, there might be some elements you can pull out of the SAFE framework that might be beneficial, but I wouldn't say it's like, oh, it's time to like pull the trigger and do 2-day PI planning sessions and things like that. Kind of the triggers that we look for. One of them is as your team starts scaling out. In Agile, we prize team autonomy pretty highly, and saying we give the team a problem, we let them figure out how to solve it. As you have multiple teams working completely autonomously, as your enterprise scales out, you're going to start stepping on each other's toes. And we're talking about like shared infrastructure, and one team might have a way of implementing that. It's completely different from another team. So we do need to generate some alignment between our teams there. Also, the larger that our teams get, our team of teams gets, and the larger the business side gets, to Elizabeth's point earlier, it's hard to make sure that we're getting the right information communicated consistently to each of the teams. And so we need to make sure that our team's voices are being heard on the business, and the business's voice is being heard on the team. So when we start to feel that tension and realizing there's some disconnects, that's a good time to start thinking, all right, let's start looking at how do we solve this problem? And that's where SAFE usually comes up in that conversation. It's building alignment not only just between the teams, but also between the business and the teams. And that's focused around that 2-day event where we say, let's get everybody together, we're all on the same page, we're all moving in the same direction. And then once we have that common ground established, then we say, all right, teams, now it's not like we're taking your autonomy from you for 2 days and then giving it back. There's a lot of autonomy within those 2 days as well. But that's where we kind of like let them do their thing and then make sure that we're seeing value being delivered. And if it's not, figure out, all right, what are we missing? So those are kind of the key questions that we're asking as we go along.
So there's an aspect there where it feels like a size item comes into play. Like your business has grown to X amount and we have many teams. However, if I look at it from like an OST perspective, where we're kind of more of the consulting element of this, can we actually use SAFE at OST as that consulting realm where we have multiple business entities, multiple clients across multiple teams? Is that still an effective approach? Could we use that? Are we using that?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I'll speak generically, not just for OST.
Sure. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry.
That's fine. There's still it's still a business to run. We still have internal projects as well. So the value that we're delivering to our clients, you can look at that in one scope, and then the value that we're creating as a business. Are we operating more efficiently? Are we improving our own processes? Are we aligned? Is the leadership aligned? Is marketing aligned? Is finance? Is everybody in alignment? And there's always opportunities there to generate more alignment and to be more productive. So we're a business by ourselves. The fact that we do consulting work is sort of, from a SAFE standpoint, it doesn't really matter the product that we're delivering. It's the alignment between the business and the teams that are doing the delivery of those products. So I think there's absolutely opportunity that we could lean into there. But also from the way that we do handle projects, I think we could also benefit from that as well. We have several projects that run multiple years. And so those could benefit from having those planning sessions and getting under that same cadence and getting that same alignment. So I think there's opportunities at several different levels to pull from the SAFE toolbox that we could improve our processes and systems.
I think, Wilson, you touched on this a little bit, but how do we go about, bringing in someone as such as yourself, like into a company to say, I think we're ready for SAFE and I think it's going to be a good fit, but what assessment takes place there? Like if you're called in and really to diagnose if they're ready for SAFE?
You're right. It's an assessment. We go in for 2, 4, maybe even 6 weeks, depending on the size of the organization and the amount of individuals that would be important for us to interview. And it is much of an observation as it is a two-way conversation back and forth from various levels within the team. Anybody from a developer, QA, manager, analyst, VP, director. We want to interview all of them because they all have a different perspective on what's working and what's not working. And unfortunately, some individuals don't want to share that information. They're more apt to say in a group setting, everything's peachy or everything's fine, or just want to focus on this. But until you can get them one-on-one and allow them to be comfortable and share some of those pain points, then we can take a step back from an outside perspective because we're not weighed down by any politics.
Sure.
We are not, our view is not changed by any other things that have been happening within the organization. So we can provide a good perspective on what aspects, maybe some, maybe all, of SAFE could be of benefit to them. And even just monitoring their ceremonies, like attend their daily stand-up, sprint planning, retrospective, and a lot of that is very telling because some of those events they might not even have or run at that point, or it's just the function of how that Scrum Master is helping facilitate. Maybe there's a modification there. And I think one thing you'll learn too in this is a lot of companies will assume that all project managers make great Scrum Masters, all business analysts make great product owners, but it's never that easy. Yeah. It's really about the individual and the characteristics that they have to fill that role.
You know, as you were saying that, we talk a lot about, you know, how developers are, and especially in 2020, as far as that, you know, nervousness to talk and things like that. We call them lurkers out in our Discord channels. Just, you know, they want to listen, but they're not really ready to interact. Throughout 2020, have you kind of changed some of that process? Are you sending out like more forms because you can't just sit in a meeting room, or what does that look like if they're unwilling to share or not quite ready yet?
I will say that it's been very surprising in 2020 how adaptable going to video conferencing has been. Okay. I was extremely nervous going into my first PI planning virtually. Like I didn't know what was going to hold because we preach that we need to be in person for those 2 full days and we need the hands at the table, right? Like we need people working and making eye contact. And it was great. It was like this, it was smooth. And the reason why is it gave everybody the same opportunity to participate. Usually 9 times out of 10, you have somebody that's co-located somewhere else, maybe a different time zone, maybe not. But either way, somebody is dialing into that meeting and it's painful for them. Yeah. Now it's not. Everybody's on the same playing field in it. It was a game changer, honestly. So to answer your question directly, it's been a lot easier than anticipated.
Is it, are there weird requirements? Not weird, but are there specific requirements like you have to have your camera on now or anything like that coming into those sessions? Or that's kind of, you feel it out and see how it goes?
It's definitely highly advisable is how we put it, to have your camera on. But we understand if somebody needs to turn it off for a period of time.
Yep. Yeah, well said. Okay. Okay, so the flip side of that, a company has brought you in and they think they're a great fit and you find out this really isn't going to work for you. What does that kind of conversation look like and how does that go?
Yeah, sometimes it's just that honest conversation of saying like, hey, this either it's a result of the assessment, which frequently that hasn't been the case. If we're going through the assessment, there's some value that we can provide. And when we talk about implementing SAFE, like you brought up that big picture at the beginning of our conversation, and even that there's an even bigger picture. Like that was just one subset of the big picture.
Oh no!
Yeah, it can get crazy. And so I recently had a conversation with it was basically a one-team development shop, and they wanted to talk about like, well, what's SAFE? Does this make sense for us? And I mean, the answer is just no. SAFE doesn't make sense. There are elements of SAFE. Like if you wanted to pick one thing and say, this is the one thing we want to do, I'd say in this particular case for this potential client, go with Scrum. Scrum's going to make sense for your single team. But you can also start with like the team level elements of SAFE and say, if we're looking at growth as a target, if we think we're going to be scaling up in the future, why wouldn't we start with like the way SAFE handles a team? Even though we don't have all the connection points to other teams and we don't have like misalignment between the business because, you know, our CEO sits 2 desks down from me or whatever. If you're going to grow, why not set that foundation early? So even if we're not doing that full big picture SAFE, there's like that bottom row of team level events. And it looks very similar to Scrum. There's some minor differences between the team level SAFE and Scrum. But if we start off on that page, then as we build our book, then we've got that continuity between the whole thing.
So in those scenarios, like they're still batching up their work, they're making the user stories, and they're working through Scrum, but maybe they add on like the program increment part of that, and they do that planning. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like that's what you would offer back to them as, why don't you start here? And then if you grow and need another team, like Netflix kept growing and growing and growing, it just kind of fit into that pattern at that point.
Yeah. That's definitely one way to approach it but a lot of it is custom tailoring that solution to the needs of the client. And so if you are a small development shop and you have one product and you have very close customer feedback and you're really good at pivoting quickly, you might not even need the PI planning event. But in some cases you might say, our teams, our stakeholders benefit from knowing like what's coming up in the future. To Elizabeth's point earlier, like marketing might want to know like, okay, what publishing material do we need to get in place? What's coming up? So having some of that forecasting and some of that road mapping that Scrum doesn't really touch on very much, but SAFe does, that can be beneficial to the other elements in your organization.
So I think kind of along those lines, I'm going to bring up that crazy picture we just talked about. Can you tell me more about like the different levels of SAFe? Because I think in this conversation, we might be talking about this essential piece, right?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean? Like what's essential and what are the other levels as we go through?
Yeah, so this essential SAFe, there's kind of two layers to this right now that you're looking at. Right below that design thinking, if you draw like another horizontal line, that's kind of the team area and it's very team focused. So we talk about Scrum, like it calls out Scrum as being the foundation of the team. So it borrows principles from Scrum and XP, potentially Kanban, depending on the makeup of your team and the makeup of your work. And so this level of SAFe, essential SAFe, is very team focused, but scaled across multiple teams. And then they've got the PI planning event in there as well. So we're kind of tying in how we run our teams, how we run our continuous delivery pipeline, and how we do PI planning events, and how we, as a train, we call them the Agile Release Train, a team of teams. How do we look back and how do we improve our train, and not just our teams? Like we have retrospectives at the team level, sure, but as an entire train, how do we get better and improve the way that we interact with each other and with the business?
And does that change a lot once you go to that large solution then?
So just like you think about a team, you have a team of teams, so you're scaling out your team level. Okay. As you get more trains, then you might start looking at your large solution SAFe. So it's still trains that are aligned around similar value streams. And so it's how do you operate these large teams of teams together in a unified way, moving towards a common goal. So it's like the next layer, and it scales out the framework itself.
I know we keep kind of throwing around some of the SAFe terms and things like that, like a train. Can we talk just a second as we're like right here talking about the train, and Brittany's smiling because I don't know, maybe this is the first time she's ever heard this. Like, can you cross, can one user in that train be on other trains? Like, what does a train actually mean for us? And no, we're not like in a subway. Like, what are we talking about, right?
Yeah, can you jump the tracks? Is that a thing you can do? Yeah, so trains frequently are aligned around value streams. And so users, they use your product or your organization's suite of products. It's very specific to your organization as to how your users are going to interact with the trains. So the trains, there's two different value streams. You've got the value streams that are the way that you have a customer, that you're acquiring a customer and delivering through the process. So they call it the concept to cash value stream. So how do you bring a user in and what process do they go through? And then eventually that results in a payment of some sort. And that's one type of value stream that an organization can have. But then the value streams that we're talking about from the IT side support those. They support the systems that build those value streams out. So the Agile release trains are generally around those operational value, or the Agile release trains are organized around those operational value streams to help support those systems. So a user will cross across the products and systems that multiple Agile release trains are going to build as you go through it.
And how in tune is like a developer within one of those trains? Do they understand all the trains? Are they getting updates from all the trains? Or is there like, I think I've heard the term scrum of scrums. Is that a thing? What does that mean to us?
Yeah, so the Scrum of Scrums is more focused around teams within a train. So a developer will have a lot of exposure to the work that other teams on their Agile release train are working on. So they do PI planning with that, with all the other teams. So that's within one single Agile release train. As we get up into the large solution safe, there's less visibility in like the day-to-day, but we do have, we try to pull information rather than push it. So there's less of a focus on sending out reports and sending out things to people that they may or may not read. And so we make information available. So as a developer, you might want to know about what's going on a different train, on a different team, and you should have access to that. You can look at another team's board and see what are they working on over here. And that way, it improves our alignment across the entire organization. So as a developer, if I'm working in one space and it's touching some of the infrastructure, I should be able to jump into another team's board that also is working on that infrastructure in a similar space. And they might be on a different team or a different Agile release train or anywhere in the organization, and see what are you guys working on that we might be colliding on. So that should be visible. It might not necessarily be pushed down to everybody, but it should be available.
Okay, that makes sense. And then is there, I'm not used to portfolio in full. Is there a large difference again at portfolio level?
I'll let Elizabeth speak to the portfolio level. That's more.
I was going to also just add in regards to large solution, because having an example sometimes helps cement that one because it's a little bit unique. But think of a hardware company or like Motorola, right, where you have hardware, firmware, software, maybe something with Bluetooth technology. Those are all probably separate trains delivering to the same value. So that's a large solution. And a lot of times there's outside vendors and suppliers that are also part of that, which is what, again, falls into that large solution. Where the program level, portfolio level sits above. That's really like where the enterprise is deciding on what their focus is going to be for the year. They may think of it as epics, they may think of it as strategic initiatives, and that's also where funding comes into play. And that's where we really focus on helping organizations move away from funding projects, but actually funding the product and funding the value stream, so that you're not having all these start-stop segments within the funding, which also can impact how these initiatives are resourced. So portfolio, think of it as the overarching how an organization or corporation is going to plan their work for the next year, maybe upwards of 3 years, to set the teams up to break out which trains are going to get which epics, then features, and then down to the user stories.
And then full safe, is that kind of just
that shows you all of them, all levels. And that's really if you have an extremely large organization that also is benefiting from the large solution trains, as well as possibly some non-large solution train setups.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I think we talked through kind of the very beginning and Agile, and then we went to Scrum, and then it feels like we maybe quickly went through Safe and got really high level. If we can jump back, there's specific roles that exist within Safe. Can we break those down and chat about those a second?
Sure.
So
where would you like to start?
Yeah, I think so. There's a release train engineer, right? What do they do?
Yeah, so the release train engineer, RTE, is basically the Scrum Master for the entire Agile release train. So just like a Scrum Master on a team, they're focused on removing blockers so that the team can focus on getting work done. So anytime something comes up that prevents them from getting work done, they kick that to the Scrum Master. Scrum Master goes after it, and the team continues working on whatever it is they need to be working on. In a similar way, the RTE is looking at what's getting in the way of the teams on a larger scale, and what blockers can we remove from their space. They also do, like the Scrum Master facilitates team-level events, the RTE facilitates your PI planning event, your inspect and adapt event, which is basically the train-level retrospective. They're forming connections throughout the organization as well, so that we can get those feedback cycles quicker. So if something's prohibiting a team from moving forward, we want the RTE to leverage already existing relationships so we can go to whoever we need to go to get answers to help unblock that team. So they bring the teams together. We talked about Scrum of Scrums earlier. That's usually facilitated by the RTE as well, making sure that routinely, instead of having a daily stand-up across the whole train, we've got something that happens still on a cadence, not every day. It could be twice a week, once a week. It's really dependent on the teams and the train to figure out what makes sense. But facilitating those checkpoints and saying, what are we working on? Are we still moving in the same direction? We came out of our PI planning event with a plan for the next quarter or 5 iterations, whatever it is. How are we tracking to that? Are there things getting in our way? Do we have work coming in that's higher priority that we weren't anticipating and we need to pivot? And so the RTE facilitates all those different conversations.
Cool. And then, so there's a couple more, there's more roles here, and I'll keep going, and hopefully I'm not badgering you too much to break these down. So the next one is system architect. I think at some point, I believe I'm actually a system architect, and you can see how unfamiliar I am with SAFe. How does that look? What am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah, so the system architect is kind of looking at, instead of just the work that a single team is doing, is how are we building a system that's larger than one team's capacity to manage? And so are we making sure that we're aligned in our infrastructure choices? Do we have operations involved that need to be where they need to be? And are we making sure that we have a long-term vision for our architecture? We're managing our architectural runway and making sure that we're building up enablers that aren't getting in the way of teams doing development. So if we're saying that we need some set of servers spun up, are we making sure that those are done ahead of time and that's called out as a dependency and that's being planned appropriately so we're not getting in the team's way so that they can use it when they need to.
Okay. And then product manager?
So the product manager, just like on a Scrum team, you've got a product owner who represents the users and the business. In SAFe, we kind of take some of that business aspect and shift that up to a product manager, which is then it's sort of like the product owner for the Agile release train. So they're maintaining those business relationships. They're understanding the priorities of the business, understanding the needs of the stakeholders and the users. And so they're also in charge of prioritizing the different features that are delivered to the teams to break down into stories. And so they're helping to make sure that they have adequate definition, that they have adequate acceptance criteria, so that the teams can take those and run an implementation against those features.
Cool. And I think we talked a little bit more about these other two, but the Scrum Master is kind of the next one, and we talked through kind of what that entails. And then product owner, you just talked a little bit about that, but essentially they own the actual product and the success of it, right? And then there's the whole Agile team that kind of sits under that. So cross-functional developers, QA, and this always comes up, and I'm curious about, maybe Wilson, you can talk about it, but where does design fit into this whole thought process? They're part of a team, I assume, but is it the beginning? Is it a different PI planning phase? What does this design do, and where do they fit? And this is Brittany, open your ears up because this part's for you, I think.
It does depend. We've tried it multiple ways, but it also depends on the scale of the engagement and what product they're trying to deliver. What we've seen work best with especially a robust design focus within an engagement is that there is a designer on each Agile team. And they're working usually also in a shared service type capacity, working ahead with wireframes for what's going to tie into the backlog, but then broken off across individual Agile teams as they function throughout a PI by sprint. Now, sometimes that becomes too robust and unnecessary. There's not enough work maybe for that designer to stay fulfilled during that sprint. So another approach is stripping away maybe the team level involvement for the day-to-day and having them focus on that shared service angle where they sit more at that program with RTE. And their whole job is to keep working ahead of the Agile teams to make sure that they are their backlog, their user stories have sufficient wireframing designs laid out so the team can move forward. A lot of times, depending on if they're at the shared service or at the Agile team level themselves, they may have a heavy hand in the QA portion too, as a good quality check towards the end.
So just wireframes, so you have just the layout. Do they use design systems usually?
Well, they have used design systems, but one thing where it's worked by doing the wireframes is if they have the, forgetting exactly what it's called from a design perspective, but basically their playbook of all the right colors, beveling, what pixel do you have around the buttons, and that's all stored and accessible for the developers to have. So even though they see it in a wireframe, they can easily find from this playbook what does that translate into for their development.
Gotcha.
Yeah, like a style guide or something.
Thank you.
Style guide.
Yes, style guide. I was like, it was right there.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's your typography, your colors, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's different ways, because a lot of times when you talk about SAFe, there's some pushback from design because there's not a lot of material on design specifically within the SAFe framework. But if you dig into any of the specific implementation roles, there's not usually a ton of information. Like, there's not a lot of content on how do you do development work in the SAFe framework, because SAFe isn't specifically for IT development. It kind of grew out of that. But you can use SAFe in a variety of different contexts. So they're even working on getting rid of the word development from a lot of the material. And so it used to be development teams, and now they're agile teams, because we're seeing success in other areas, not just software development. So when it comes to design, a lot of the times, some of the pushback that we get is, well, we don't want designs to be specific to each team and have a designer on each team that now they're designing things, and when you go into this part of the application, it looks completely different from this other part of the application. So how do we're not necessarily saying like the big design up front, but how do we maintain that consistency? And so SAFe introduces the idea of communities of practice. And it's good for any role, not just design, but have the like-minded people, have your designers get together on a regular basis, have your quality assurance analysts get together, have your developers get together and say, what are our standards? What are our best practices? How do we enforce those things and develop those tools that then they bring back to their teams to provide that alignment and that consistency across the different teams?
Right.
So I think something caught my ear a little bit there. Just from a front-end web developer like myself, I heard like SAFe is a framework. And the only thing I can equate that to is like JavaScript is the language, Angular is a framework, React is a framework. So you can kind of use the parts and pieces that you need and bend it to how you want it to. But at the end of the day, the work or the product is what actually matters. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like, you'll hear some of the criticisms about SAFe is that it's too prescriptive, it's too heavy-handed, and it doesn't fit all organizations. But that's true of every framework that you have. You're not going to use every piece in every situation, but you've got these tools in your toolbox to solve specific problems. And in true Agile fashion, SAFe doesn't trump Agile. If something isn't working right, then we can pivot, we can adjust that. If your daily stand-ups for whatever reason aren't working right, there's a space within the framework to say, why aren't they working right? Can we fix that or address that? Or do we say, let's adjust them? Maybe daily is too much. Maybe we've got team members that are only available part-time. And so maybe daily is too much time for us to sync up because we're not working every day together. So
that's well said. You know, kind of keeping that agile aspect to all of this. That's the important part. Awesome. Well, we've been talking for like 45 minutes straight, and I love the conversation, but I think I'm going to have to break it off there, and you guys are just going to have to come back on. I hope that's okay.
Part two.
So at this time, we're going to jump into what we love to call our Purrfect Picks. And Elizabeth, you are first on the list. Your pick.
Well, I feel like you gave me a great segue because you said how it's a framework and you pick the pieces and parts that work well for you. So this book, reading it right now as part of our Agile book club, gives you actual true stories.
You totally missed it. Sorry.
You what? Oh, you want me to hold it up again?
I totally missed it. There we go. Sweet. Reading it live.
Yes. But it's really good. It's got factual stories of how other organizations and consultants have worked with them through their SAFe implementation and tweaks that they've made. So it really honors that this is a framework and it does not have to be prescriptive. And it gives you different insights to how you could better utilize sprint planning or how you could better utilize a quick launch into a SAFe transformation. It's just good to hear other perspectives. As always, that's how we grow, right? It's a quick read. Even though it's super thick, it's a quick read.
I think that's just because you're a fast reader. I don't know. Cool. Brett, you are up next with Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, this book is near and dear to my heart. It's not really like Agile or SAFe specific in any way, but it just kind of talks about, like, I see the tie-ins to an autonomous team and saying, every problem that I'm experiencing right now, I have some degree of control or influence over that. And what is that? And how can I act on it? And so it's getting away from pointing fingers at other people and saying like, well, this was kind of your fault, and saying regardless of whose fault it is, it's my responsibility to make things better and improve things, and taking actionable steps to do that. And so it's written from it's two former Navy SEALs, and so every chapter is like they talk about a war story, which I like those. A lot of people don't, so you can skip over that if you don't like it. But then they talk about a concept or a principle around that ownership. And then they illustrate it from a business context. So they also have a business consulting agency now. So it's like war story, principle, business context. And so it's neat to kind of go through those different elements and follow those.
Do they say work the problem a lot?
They don't say work the problem.
Oh, okay. I used to sit next to a SEAL in my first job, and he would always say, just work the problem. That's what we did in SEALs, just work the problem. I was like, okay.
Yeah, no, they have a principle called default aggressive, where by default you take action, which is pretty much, I mean, that's the Agile way, is let's not sit and ponder and plan and think about what might be and come up with a perfect plan and then take a step. It's by default, we're going to take a step and see how that goes, and then that'll direct our next step. And so the default aggressive mentality is just, let's start going and then refine as we go along.
Cool. I think Brittany tricked me and she swapped out her original pick.
I did. I threw you for a loop.
You're up next. And I think your first one is Web Developer Monthly.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about that one first. Yeah, this is a monthly newsletter that Zero to Mastery puts out, but I always learn something pretty much every month reading that. So it's really informative. It's got a lot of JavaScript, a lot of React stuff in it, but it covers all areas of front-end web development. There's also one for Python and machine learning if you're more into that side of things.
I feel like I know someone that is an author out here. Is that someone you know too?
Who is that?
Aren't you an author on ZTM?
Oh, I don't know if I have anything on ZTM actually. I have a workshop on ZTM.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm no.
Your second pick.
You're trying to plug me, but
I tried so hard.
I'm not an author yet.
So the second pick, which is a pick I don't know how I've missed, because this is a fantastic book, The Unicorn Project. Tell me about it.
Yeah, as we were talking, I just started thinking, I just read it like a few months ago, and I started thinking like, oh, that reminds me of that book that I read. And so then I just switched up my pick on you because it's such a great book. It kind of goes over some of these methodologies, but more in like a realistic setting. And so it takes you through a company and how all the employees are unhappy and then how they kind of transition that into like a better work environment. It's a really cool book.
The first book in that series, The Phoenix Project, was, I mean, that was a smash hit.
That was so good.
Yeah, I read that one a couple times. The Phoenix,
I didn't know it was a series.
Yeah, he's a great author.
I'm writing that down now.
Kim is how you pronounce it. Fantastic on both those books.
Agreed.
So my pick is something totally anti-safe, and I went with this Shape Up book by Basecamp. So yeah, it's I say anti-safe, but it's very similar. It's a really cool read. I have not made my way all the way through it. It's just a different aspect to like product management, and it just breaks down some really simple items. And this is what Basecamp uses, which if you haven't heard of Basecamp, check it out. It's really cool too. Okay. Thank you all so much. I really, really appreciate your time. We're going to have you on again. We have like another like half a list of things we didn't make it through. Just some of those interpersonal skills that I want to get back to for like developers and designers, and, you know, how to become those things if you're just getting started. So definitely have you both back. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining.
We're supposed to crazy wave.